Welcome to the channel. In today's video, we will read the update of the story about man who had a coworker excluded only him out of the coworker wedding, so he decided to tell everyone in his work group the truth. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, I highly recommend watching it on our channel first to fully understand the story and its progression. Let's get started. Update 2. After reading the comments calling me a doormat, I decided not to accept their dinner offer. I called Bob on his work phone to explain my change of heart. He was disappointed, but understood my reasoning. I parroted some of the talking points, and he said he understood. He wouldn't make a big deal out of it, and we could just move on. I thanked him for being cool about it, and he hung up. I thought that would be the end of it, but not 5 minutes later, Bob called me back. I groaned and picked up, and surprisingly, it was Pam on the other side. She didn't come at me hostile, but she did sound upset. She wanted to know why I didn't want to come anymore. I explained what I told Bob about how they basically insisted I was a creep. I told her I didn't want to invalidate her experiences, but I didn't have to accept being told I'm a potential sexual predator. She said that she didn't mean it like that and that she thinks I'm a good person but couldn't risk it for her wedding. She was practically begging me to meet her in person to clear the air further. She kept on saying that we could be the best of friends if I'd give her a chance to explain better. I said no thanks and that I'd had to go, but I'm sorry that she went through what she went through. I ended the call by saying, "By the way, I didn't even get those donuts." I then hung up. It's been quiet since then, but Bob is back in the office on Monday, and I fear Pam might do something drastic. I hope this thing is over, but I fear it might not be. In any case, I'll update you if anything happens. Update 3. Well, something did happen. Bob spilled all the beans, so let's move on with the final update to see how this story ends. And now this silly drama continues. I went in 2 hours early on Monday so that I could potentially avoid a Bob after-work chat. Surprisingly, Bob came in an hour early, lining him up to potentially leave with me. Bob looked exhausted, and I don't mean tired, I mean mentally. I've seen Bob tired. We've worked many late nights on projects together. I've seen him hungover. This wasn't any of that. I almost can't describe it. He looked worn down. He shot me a sub nod, and I gave him one back, and we got to work. I kept my meeting with HR. Our HR rep is a wonderful lady named Sally. I told Sally the whole story, and she said that in her 15 years of HR work, she's never heard a more stupid story. We shared a good laugh, and she told me that it would be unofficially logged just in case Bob or Pam did anything crazy. She told me she thinks Bob is harmless, but to keep my eyes sharp. The rest of the day was uneventful. The most interesting thing that happened was that I saw Bob's face buried in his hands for a good minute or so. With 2 hours to go, I went to the break room for some water. Bob followed me in and approached cautiously. I gave him a surprised look, and he just threw up his hands as if to say he was not hostile. He said he knows he's the last person I want to talk to right now, but he needs to talk to me. I said fine, but I angled us over to where the security camera was. Paraphrasing here, he said, "Look, I won't ever speak to you again if you don't want me to, but let me buy you around and explain all of the things Pam didn't tell you when we met the other day." Bob sounded desperate, something I'd never seen from him before. He then hit me with the money quote, "Look, man, I could really use a friend right now, and I've always considered you a friend." Well, sorry to disappoint everyone here, but I'm a big gullible softie. I agreed to talk with him, but I told him that there would be absolutely no more meetings on this situation after this. He agreed and said he'd meet me after work. After work, we walked to our usual bar, the same one I met him and Pam at the first time. I suspected Pam might be there, but she wasn't. Nevertheless, I kept my eye open for her. Once we sat down, Bob apologized yet again. This one seemed even more genuine than the first. I told him he didn't need to keep apologizing. I got it the first time. He said that he had to apologize because there's a lot more to the story about the wedding than I thought. Bob explained that he fought Pam like hell to give up the single man's exclusion, but she was dead set on it. They argued for months, and a lot of people offered different solutions. Bob suggested a smaller wedding with only immediate family and friends, but Pam shot that down. She always dreamed of a big wedding with lots of people there, and a small wedding just didn't fit her dream. Her parents said, "Why not hire a security guard?" Pam said that she wanted the possibility eliminated completely. She said that a few single men could stand to not be invited to a party for once in their lives. Bob said he had a lot of friends who wanted to come and that they would be hurt if they weren't invited. Pam said she was making sacrifices too. A lot of her guy friends wanted to come. Bob finally relented and said if the exclusion were to happen, he wanted nothing to do with that decision and wanted it known that it was out of his hands. Pam said she'd take the heat for it if it came to that, but didn't think people would go crazy over it. She also gave Bob the choice of their honeymoon destination since he was making a big sacrifice. They went to the French Riviera, if anyone is curious. Bob said the wedding reception and party was amazing. He said that so many women there were drunk off their asses and falling over themselves. Apparently, they did feel safe, but a drunk vocal minority was complaining about the lack of hot guys to dance with. Bob even laughed because one of them was going around calling it a lesbian wedding since there were only women there. Oh, and some women were absolutely hitting on the handful of single guys there, but Pam didn't mind that as much. Bob said he wasn't rubbing it in and just setting up a point. After the honeymoon, they came home to what Bob described as a PR firestorm. Apparently, Pam had lied to her guy friends about why they weren't invited. One of her close friends let slip the real reason they weren't invited. They were effing furious. She was floored with angry calls and messages from her friends about Pam essentially calling them potential sexual predators. Pam explained her position multiple times to her friends, but it fell on deaf ears. She has lost many friends over this. One of the guys said, "If you think I'm an a-hole, then why the fuck are we even friends?" Pam has been crying for days, and her work life has become terrible. She might need to leave her job by this point. Bob had a few hard drinks and was tipsy, so he let loose a little more. He said that her decision had cost him friends of his own. So many of his guy friends were furious to learn they were excluded, and the reason why. On the day of the wedding, about 6 or so of his closest friends who were excluded decided to go on a fishing trip as a screw you to Bob and Pam, the cherry on top of the petty cake. They decided to donate $500 and some items to a local women's shelter. Bob was devastated, and none of those guys are returning his calls or messages. Even their families are upset with them over the exclusion. Pam's parents are publicly supportive but chastise her behind the scenes. She doesn't have anyone but her bridesmaids and about 3 other friends who believe in her cause. Bob said at one point that Pam was hysterical and screaming, "Why can't anyone just understand my point of view?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but there was more to this crazy story. At this point, we were about an hour in and Bob was nice and tipsy, so I pried for more information. Bob said that at first Pam was sticking to her guns and that the exclusion was a good idea, but she was starting to waver a little bit. She said that most people understood where she was coming from, but that it was too heavy-handed and even a little sexist. Bob and Pam have had multiple blow-ups over this whole situation, and they're not in a good place right now. He said that instead of feeling giddy about his new wife and basking in the glow of being married, he's harboring a ton of resentment towards her because she cost him a lot of his friends and ruined their lives over a stupid party. As for me, apparently Pam really likes me. One of her biggest regrets about this entire situation is not getting to know me better before the wedding. He said that Pam thinks I'm one of the coolest people she's ever met. I asked Bob how she made that determination from a 15-minute chat, and he laughed and said, "I don't know, man. She probably has a crush on you or something." I laughed, but that made the situation a little bit weird. As for Pam's sister, she is a floozy, but not in the way you may think. Bob explained that Pam's sister Beth is, by all accounts, a very smart, successful, respectful woman. She just happens to like sex. Bob explained that Beth is really into the kink scene and is into things like ethical non-monogamy. She frequently mentions her adventures to Bob and Pam, and it got them into the lifestyle as well. I was a little surprised, and I asked for clarification, and he said, "Yeah, she kind of got us into some of that stuff." I was shocked. I mean, how often do you hear your coworker is into BDSM? But hey, no kink shaming from me. So it turns out that Beth isn't some soul-sucking, home-wrecking, out-of-control succubus. She's just a regular woman who loves sex. Bob said that Pam was scared that we would hit it off. We share many of the same interests and have similar personality types, according to Bob. Pam wasn't lying about that, nor that I was exactly her type. She likes tall guys, and from what I've heard, she'd have been all over me if she'd found out I was single. Well, now I was curious. So I asked Bob if he had a picture. He pulled up her Instagram, and I must say, she was damn gorgeous. She looked like Pam's twin, only she was a little bit thicker. I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty pissed at Pam all over again. Whoa. Bob said that Pam has always been a little jealous of Beth. I don't know why. Pam is a stunner herself and looks just like Beth. Bob said that as an FU to Pam, he'd give her my Insta so that we can DM each other. And he'd put in a good word for me. I thanked him profusely. So he said that Pam was so desperate to make amends with me because I made a big impression on her, and she thinks that we'd be really good friends if we hung out. Bob said that she was just grasping at straws at this point. She's lost all of her friends, and she wanted to make another one. He said that he'd rein Pam in so that she wouldn't bother me anymore. By this point, Bob is more than tipsy. He says that he's having doubts about this marriage because the wedding process and aftermath had been a nightmare. He thinks it'd be really shallow to divorce her over this, but his life has been ruined by her choices. I was shocked, and he said, "Don't tell Pam, please." I swore that I wouldn't tell her anything. Bob paid for our drinks and he was going to take public transportation home, but I told him he needs an Uber. He fought me on that, but I insisted, and he agreed to take one. I put him in the Uber and sent him on his way. An hour later, Pam texted me from his work phone. She told me, "Thank you for taking care of my hubby, you're a good person." I didn't respond, and that's the end of this story. What do you guys think about this whole situation? What would you do if you were in the poster shoes? Let me know in the comment section.